Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. By immediately calling out such an unreasonable and astonishing price, he thought that it would make him look more powerful. However, he didn't know that he had already committed the big taboo of auction. All of these people were people of status in the breezy plains. Which one was easily frightened? To show such urgency over this item only told other people how badly he wanted it. At the very most, it could make some bidders who had close relationship with him give up bidding. However, he didn't have to raise the price so high if he had wanted to dissuade close friends from bidding. Just adding to the base price by a little would achieve the same effect. If it was something not so important, close friends would certainly give him some face by not bidding for it. If it was something very necessary, then 5 million wouldn't be able to scare those rich families off. As the people downstairs kept looking in his direction, how could they hide their expressions from Lin Li? However, Lin Li didn't care about others' opinions, and wouldn't tell them his true thoughts. After all, how could he tell them that he didn't want to waste time? That would be too hurtful. Of course, Lin Li definitely wouldn't tell them that this seemingly ordinary branch was actually a piece of debris of the stars which possessed the power to manipulate life. Getting hold of it was equivalent to having an undying body, so nobody would be able to resist this temptation. If anyone else knew about this, Lin Li didn't have the confidence to win the bid over Glitter Gold Trade Union. Any kind of relationship was nothing compared to this. Those unscrupulous merchants didn't care about relationships. To them, money was their closest friend. Mage Felix from the Tower of Dusk bid 5 million gold coins. William was rather disappointed. He had high hopes for the branch, but it didn't induce any waves in the audience. If Mage Felix hadn't raised the bid to 5 million directly, the outcome would have been even worse. Going once, going twice, William raised his gravel, ready to seal the deal after asking for the third time. However, just then, another bid came from upstairs and made him withdraw his gravel. 6 million gold coins. This voice caused an uproar in the auction hall. Nobody could imagine who would be interested in this ordinary branch other than the nouveau riche who had just earned 10 million gold coins. However, Lin Li could clearly hear that the bidding voice had come from outside his door. He instructed Norfeller to open the door. Outside the door, Castellan Arather of Roland City was about to knock. He put down his arm and smiled apologetically. President Felix, I seek your understanding. This item is very important to me. Please come in, Castellan Arather. Lin Li looked very composed. He wasn't at all angry that someone was competing with him for the item. Whoever with the highest bid would get the lot. Nobody had the right to snatch another's freedom to bid. Wilkinson and his companions, however, didn't seem as calm as Lin Li. Although the Castellan of Roland City held considerable power and reputation, Wilkinson and his companions didn't think he was anyone important. Seeing that Arather had come in with his 2 attendants, Wilkinson and his companions didn't hide the displeasure on their faces, though they didn't doubt Lin Li's decision. Arather didn't dare to show any negligence to Wilkinson and his companions. Although they didn't look pleased with his visit, Arather still put on a smile and greeted every pharmacist respectfully. Of course, Arather's attitude wasn't reciprocated. He wasn't bothered by this, though. After all, it was universally acknowledged in the Emerald world that every capable pharmacist had a bad temper. Seems like Castellan Arather is also interested in this treasure. Lin Li raised his bid to 7 million before turning to Arather with keen interests, making William put down his gravel again. Lin Li wasn't angry with Arather's sudden participation in the bid, but he couldn't help feeling very curious. This was because he hadn't called for 5 million gold coins randomly. He had made this decision only after thorough contemplation. Lin Li was very clear about what this branch was for. However, other people probably didn't know its use until now. Even the sharper ones only knew that the natural fragrance of this branch contained powerful vitality. How could Lin Li as a pharmaceutics guru not know that Wilkinson had wanted the branch for his herb farm? Maybe a lot of other high-level pharmacists or pharmaceutics masters would have the same idea. Hence, Lin Li had raised the bid to 5 million as it was the highest price this branch could take if it had only this effect. If the price was any higher, it would be over the presumed value in people's eyes. So, this 5 million was to dissuade these so-called sharp-eyed people from bidding and save some time. This was why Lin Li was curious. Why would a author participate in this bidding? He wanted to raise the production of crops. 5 million was already the most any pharmacists would be willing to pay if they wanted to put the branch in their herb farms. A author, however, had started with 6 million gold coins. If he wasn't a fool, he most likely knew something about the branch. This, a author turned around and peered at his attendants inadvertently. He then sat on an empty chair, and said to Lin Li, "I'm terribly sorry, Mage Felix. This treasure is really very important to me, so can you?" Although Arother's cheap shot didn't catch the eye of others, it didn't escape Lin Li's eyes. After Arother had sat down, Lin Li scanned Arother's attendants, while he listened to Arother. Downstairs on the stage, William asked about the bid twice, and held up his gravel again. 8 million gold coins, exclaimed Arother immediately. Good. 8 million gold coins is the current bid for this treasure, from the Elven Kingdom. Anyone wants to raise the price even higher? William announced with passion, but he was also secretly worried. Though it was good to see people competing for the bid, did Arother even know what he was doing by competing with Mage Felix? Lin Li scanned every one of Arother's attendants, not just to look at them, but, more importantly, to feel their energy waves. He could sense from Arother's actions that it wasn't Arother's own intention to bid for the branch. However, what kind of person would Arother willingly serve as the castellan of Roland City? Mage Felix, Roland City will always be your loyal ally if you are willing to give this item to me. Arother convinced Lin Li with sincerity. Who are you to be the ally of our Tower of Dusk? You are just a little castellan. Do you think you are so important? Wilkinson couldn't help but mock him. Though he didn't sound polite, anyone who knew the Tower of Dusk would know that what he said was very true. Arother wasn't angry upon hearing Wilkinson's words. Instead, he was shocked that Wilkinson said our Tower of Dusk when he mentioned the Tower of Dusk. He had thought that the Tower of Dusk had recruited these pharmacists, but did it now mean that all these pharmacists belonged to the Tower of Dusk? Lin Li was very surprised that Arother had raised the bid to 8 million gold coins. Could it be that the one behind Castellan Arother had already known the secret to this branch? Although Roland City was prosperous, and the Castellan had control of all taxes other than income tax paid to the Felon Kingdom, Lin Li knew that 8 million was definitely not a small sum to Arother. If he hadn't known something, Arother wouldn't have agreed to pay so much for a branch. With this question in mind, Lin Li examined Arother's attendants more carefully, hoping to catch every bit of unusual energy wave. Downstairs, William had asked about the bid twice and raised up his gravel again, all ready to seal the deal with the third inquiry. Lin Li frowned unobservably at that moment. Although Lin Li's myth potion had been auctioned at a whopping 10 million gold coins, he would only get about 8 million gold coins of income after deducting the transaction fee he needed to pay William. Hence, everyone thought that it was highly likely that Lin Li wouldn't be able to afford 8 million gold coins. Nobody believed that Wilkinson and his companions would give all their earnings to the Tower of Dusk. Maybe because of this speculation, the person behind Arother felt that victory was already in his hands after Arother had raised the bid to 8 million gold coins. Thus, his emotions couldn't help but register a slight wave. As a legendary mage, Lin Li was very sensitive to magical energy, and managed to catch this wave. He fixed his attention on one of Arother's attendants, and finally spotted some clues. Back at the Endless World, Lin Li had been a hunter. One of the necessary skills that hunters needed to learn was camouflage. Unlike the stealth movement skills of the assassins which emphasized hiding their identities and attacking their enemies stealthily, hunters could change their appearance using the camouflage skill. Low-level camouflage could make magical beasts lose their target. This was known as dispelling aggro in the game. It was one of the best skills to use when trying to escape from a group of magical beasts. Medium-level camouflage could change one's appearance and behavior, and also make oneself appear to be the target, either in human or magical beast form. high-level camouflage was Lin Li's favorite. It could not only change one's appearance, but also change faction in the game, and even allowed the imitator to use some low-level skills that the person imitated had. Although the above was referring to things in the Endless World game, Lin Li already knew that the Endless World was somewhat linked to Amril by now. For example, the appearance of the debris of the stars could prove this point. Now, Lin Li discovered traces of camouflage on one of Arathar's attendants after careful inspection. Nothing in the world was perfect, and there were always two sides to things. Assassins could use their stealth movement skills to blend into the background. However, they could only move at very slow speeds to achieve that. Hunter's camouflage was also not undiscoverable. Lin Li had frequently used this skill back in the Endless World, and had unlocked the achievement Camouflage Master as a result. Hence, his understanding of this skill was much better than that of normal people in Amril. Lin Li didn't even move. He was able to find every trace of camouflage that attendant was using just from his experience with camouflage alone. As if pulling threads of silk off a silkworm cocoon, Lin Li peeled off the attendant's disguise to find his true identity bit by bit. Though this might sound rather troublesome, it was just a matter of scanning the person from head to toe for Lin Li to expose all the camouflage he was using. However, Lin Li was shocked after seeing through the attendant's camouflage. This explained why Lin Li hadn't been able to see through his identity at the start. The true identity of Arathar's attendant was an elf. Lin Li suddenly recalled another thing about Castellan Arathar. It was back when Arathar had just become the Castellan of Roland City. Back then, Roland City, which was now honored as a city of abundance, had been in chaos. Arathar's father, the former Castellan, had been assassinated in the Castellan mansion. All his subordinates had been busy fighting for power and wealth. The entire Roland City had been in so much turmoil that there hadn't been any sign of it being a city of abundance. Meanwhile, outside Roland City, other factions had been eyeing it like wolves, all hoping to snatch this granary of the breezy plains into their own possession. Everyone had thought that Roland City would inevitably fall, and would be pressed hard to recover to its glorious old days. The succeeding Castellan, 20-year-old Arathar, hadn't been seen as capable enough to settle this mess in Roland City. Thus, everyone had been waiting to see Arathar fail. The Castellans of several neighboring cities had even bet on whether Arathar could secure his position for more than a month. However, much to everyone's surprise, Arathar had not only secured the position for more than a month, he had also secured it to the extent that almost nobody could bring him down. Arathar had achieved this with the help of the elves. An elven army had swept all rebels in Roland City clean in under 10 days. Nobody knew where this elven army had come from. Nobody knew why those arrogant elves would help Arathar. They only knew that Arathar had firmly secured his position as the Castellan of Roland City with the help of this elven army, even when nobody had thought he could do so. Looking at this right now, Arathar had not only relied on the elves to suppress the rebels, he never ceased the contact with the elves even after securing the position of Castellan. What surprised Lin Li more was not the identity of this attendant being an elf, but the fact that he couldn't make out the magical waves on this elf. It was evident that this elf's magical abilities were rather strong. However, it was impossible for Lin Li to give up on this piece of debris of the stars, rebirth, just because of this. Lin Li's eyes met those of the attendant for a second, and he gently curved his lips, smiling with much interest. Since Lin Li already knew that an elf was participating in the bid, it was now understandable why Arathar was competing for this branch with Lin Li. Lin Li didn't answer Arathar directly, but raised the bid again. 9 million gold coins. The crowd downstairs erupted into an uproar again. There had already been a record-breaking transaction of 10 million gold coins just now. Could that record be broken again so quickly, given that the bidding was already catching up to that price? This mage Felik really didn't treat money like money. He had just earned 10 million gold coins from auctioning off the myth potion. Now, he had spent it on this branch. William must have earned a lot from all these transactions. Not to mention 10 million gold coins, Lin Li wouldn't flinch if he had to pay 20 million or even 30 million gold coins in order to prevent this piece of debris of the stars from landing into the hands of others. As someone who had owned the Stars of Fury and the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, he knew very well how terrifying these weapons were. These were divine weapons that could even kill the dragon of destruction. Arathar's face turned pale. He had heard from his daughter that this mage Felix was very powerful. His attendant could kill an ice howler single-handedly. Mage Felix even defeated a lich and the humorous Wyrm that the lich had summoned. Now, this mage Felix was not only the owner of the Tower of Dusk, but also the president of the Guild of Magic in the Breezy Plains, and even obtained the support of a batch of high-level pharmacists. With all achievements and abilities, Mage Felix probably couldn't be bothered to care about a mere castellan like Arathar himself. 10 million gold coins. Arathar wouldn't want to become Mage Felix's enemy if it wasn't necessary due to certain circumstances. Even as the castellan of Roland City, he still often couldn't make his own decisions. The entire hall was silent. How fast was it that the new lot had caught up with the record-breaking auction price of the previous one? More importantly, it seemed that the record of 10 million gold coins could not be maintained much longer given how this auction was unfolding. Damn it, was this lousy branch even worth it all? Was it because the crowd was too ignorant, or because these big shots were too stupid and rich? The audience all thought that they had learned something new that day. If they had known that these big shots were so easily tricked, they might have as well chopped some branch and auctioned it. Those sitting downstairs were rather reputable people outside. However, they were surprised to see these people who didn't treat money like money. They had felt that although their power and influence weren't as great as those of the Manhwa family or Dark Blade, and their wealth didn't match that of the Glitter Gold Trade Union or Gilded Rose, the difference wasn't so big. It wasn't impossible for them to catch up or even overtake these powerful families with enough hard work and some luck. However, those people downstairs felt this gap between themselves and the rich families widening after witnessing their bids. Their hopes were getting further away, and were eventually smashed. This was too upsetting. How much time and effort did they have to put in to earn 10 million gold coins? How could these people just spend it all on a branch? It was understandable to spend it on the myth potion, but what was the use of the branch? Did they really think it came from the Tree of Eternity? Mage Felix, I know that you have just auctioned the myth potion that you've concocted, and it was bought by Mr. Rob Bio from the Glitter Gold Trade Union at 10 million gold coins. So, you have much more money than a mere castellan like me. However, I urge you to carefully consider if it's worth it to spend so much on something that pharmacists can only put in their herb farms. This 10 million gold coins are enough to buy a lot of precious herbs and diversify the types of herbs in your herb farm. Why are you even fighting for this rather useless thing with me? Arathar attempted to convince Lin Li politely after raising the bid to 10 million. 11 million gold coins. Lin Li first raised the bid, then turned, smiled at Arathar, and said, Castellan Arathar, why are you fighting with me since you've said it's rather useless? Have you forgotten that the first one to bid was me? You are the one who's competing with me. The crowd downstairs erupted into a clamor. They couldn't believe that the record just created during today's auction hosted by the Time Consignment Store was renewed so fast. From 3 million to 10 million, and still rising. How high would the new record reach? What was so special about this insignificant branch that so many people were crazy after it? Arathar's face turned even paler. Meanwhile, his elven companion seemed to be trying hard to suppress his anger. Though Roland City was honored as the city of abundance, Arathar's family wealth had been long gone after the chaos 20+ years ago. Even after the reconstruction of the city afterwards, the accumulation of wealth was still very limited. Arathar couldn't help but hesitate. Taking out 10 million would already greatly affect Roland City. Though Roland City was owned by Arathar's family to a certain extent, this didn't mean that Arathar could play around with this city and its people at will. More importantly, the responsibility Roland City held as the granary of the Breezy Plains was crucial. Any changes would greatly affect the entire Breezy Plains. If Arathar had done anything that harmed the interests of Roland City, its inhabitants, various factions in Roland City, castellans of neighboring cities, and even the royal family of Felon Kingdom wouldn't spare Arathar so easily. Seeing Arathar's hesitation, the elf beside him showed obvious signs of anxiety. This anxiety was worsened with every inquiry William made downstairs. 11 million gold coins. This treasure from the Elven Kingdom is now at 11 million gold coins, bid by President Felix of the Tower of Dusk. Anyone with a higher bid? William sounded rather excited. Not to mention the crowd downstairs, even the guests in the guest rooms were stunned by Lin Li's bid. Although everyone knew that Lin Li had earned a large sum from the myth potion, it still took a lot of boldness to spend everything just like that. How much had this Tower of Dusk developed since its founding less than a year ago? Given that this young president was willing to spend so much, it could at least show that the wealth he possessed wasn't just the 10 million he had earned just now. If not, he wouldn't have spent everything he had just earned on a branch of unknown origin. After all, 10 million was so important to a newly established faction. So young. Prince Hilary shook his head and sighed. It seemed like this genius lad, who Los admired so much, wasn't all that perfect. In this world, geniuses weren't so rare. Talented people often faced the same problem. That was, certain flaws were also magnified just as their talents in certain aspects were magnified. Due to this reason, many geniuses couldn't develop to their full potential before being overcome by this problem. Hilary's biggest hobby was to collect all kinds of strange objects and investigate forgotten skills. He was well known in Amril because of this. Although he believed that he could afford to spend 10 million gold coins, he definitely wouldn't spend it all on an insignificant branch. Judging from the current circumstances, this genius lad that Los admired had fallen into a fight over reputation, a mistake young people often committed. If not, any rational person wouldn't have made such a decision. Hilary suddenly felt bored, and dispelled the idea to visit the Tower of Dusk in Duland. This genius lad most likely couldn't escape his eventual downfall. Rob Bio of the Glitter Gold Trade Union, however, had another thought in mind. Since his boss Hoffman admired this mage Felix so much, couldn't he seek this chance to forge a closer relationship with mage Felix by lending him some money? After all, the Glitter Gold Trade Union could lend its money to anyone. It was too much that Glitter Gold was attending this auction anyway, since its competing bidder's money was most likely lying in the gold reserves of the Glitter Gold Trade Union. 11 million gold coins. Anyone with a higher bid? 11 million gold coins going twice. William's voice had covered the noises of the crowd. The deal would be sealed when William struck down with his gravel after the asking for the third time. Arother wasn't willing to risk Roland City's future on this bid. However, the elf standing behind him could hide no longer. After William's second inquiry, he stood forward and shouted, 12 million gold coins. 15 million gold coins. Before Arother and the elf could even communicate, Lin Li had already chased up to them and placed his bid without hesitation. As soon as he placed his bid, the miscellaneous noises ceased, and there was a sudden explosive sound that seemed like it was going to break the roof instead. It was just like a volcano that had erupted after staying dormant for a long time. No one bothered about William and the rules of the auction, for the bid was shocking enough to make everyone lose their mind. 15 million gold coins. Damn it, he actually wants to pay so much just for this broken branch, and that without hesitation. Is there something wrong with this mage Felix brain? Those people had already become jaded after hearing the sky-high bids, but the new bid of 15 million was already beyond what they could accept. Damn, if I had those 15 million gold coins, I would rather use them to buy better magic equipment and solicit stronger subordinates. This money is enough to double my abilities and strength. That madman Felix Tower of Dusk has only been established for a year, and he should be in need of a large amount of funds now. Yet, he wants to spend all of the money that he had just earned on some useless tree branch. Lots of people thought the same, and they all felt that they would rather invest their money in their own forces in his place. In fact, all of them had seen big money before. After all, they also owned powerful forces which dominated their respective fields. Their combined assets were definitely more than 10 million gold coins. However, owning 10 million gold coins was not the same as spending 10 million gold coins. 10 million gold coins could be put to various uses, yet Lin Li spent it all on a tree branch that was definitely not worth that much money even if it were taken from the Tree of Eternity. What would the mages of the Tower of Dusk think if they were to find out? Anyway, if I were them, I would definitely kick him out of the damn Guild of Magic. I doubt the Tower of Dusk can last long with such a selfish president. It's only a matter of time before they disband. Almost all the people in the audience were agitated. Although Lin Li had nothing to do with them, they were really anxious. Indeed, the lives of everyone were different. I worked so hard to manage the forces under me for the sake of a small territory, and I even had to stain my hands with blood for the sake of earning money. Yet, I still don't have 10 million gold coins. If you think you have too much money, I can spend it for you. If you like tree branches, I'll give you all of the branches in my territory. While seated in the VIP room, Lin Li immediately placed a bid of 15 million gold coins, giving Wilkinson as well as everyone else a great shock. They reckoned that they were the only ones who knew the use of the tree branch and what it was really worth. They knew that the estimated value of the branch was probably just 5 million or 6 million gold coins. After all, the effect still had to be tested. However, they did not expect Master Felix to bid such a huge sum for the treasure. At this point, there was no need for a Rother to be calculated with the elves either. Even the Castellan of Roland City had no choice but to think to himself, if you elves are rich, you may continue bidding and vying. This is all that I can do. The elf who had stood forth was instantly dumbfounded as he froze and stood rooted to the ground. How could he have expected to meet such a ruthless person? He angrily thought to himself, you're just a filthy and lowly human, how dare you covet the treasures of us elves? It's such an insult to our treasures and to us. Unforgivable. The elves were not to be trifled with, they were no pushovers. Perhaps they used to be ones a long time ago, but after experiencing the disaster that almost wiped their entire race out, they became jaded, and were no longer kind or peace-loving. They began to think that those qualities were ridiculous. There had been countless humans who entered the Emerald Forest where the elves had fled. Most died in the Emerald Forest, though some deaths might have been caused by misunderstandings. For human beings, the Emerald Forest should be regarded as the only forbidden area in the land of Anrel. A menacing gaze formed in the eyes of the elf as he stared at the human who was competing for his treasure and remaining seated leisurely with a look of contempt. 15 million gold coins. Is this going to be a new record, or is someone else going to continue breaking it? This is the last chance. 15 million gold coins going thrice. Actually, 15 million gold coins was way more than William had expected. He followed the procedure and asked thrice. At last, he raised the gravel and prepared to seal the deal. Wait a minute, the elf yelled in a bid to stop William from slamming down the gravel. He did not place a new bid, however. I'm sorry, sir, but if you'd like to postpone the transaction according to the rules of the auction, you'll have to gain the approval of Mage Felix beforehand, William said loudly. Actually, under normal circumstances, his words would have been considered to be rejection, and only a fool would allow his rival to have more time to raise his bid. Mage Felix, I was just wondering if you could give me some time to discuss something with you. I hope to gain your approval, said Arother. Unlike Arother, the elf would never swallow his pride and stoop that low. Go ahead. Lin Li nodded nonchalantly. Had he not discovered that the elf was disguising as a follower, he wouldn't have bothered to waste his time. However, he was now interested in seeing what tricks the elf was getting up to. Arother and the elf were actually standing rather close to each other. However, when they approached the entrance, they began to talk to each other about something in soft yet agitated voices. They had deliberately lowered their volume so much that even the sharp-sensed Lin Li could not hear their conversation clearly, though he heard that they were talking about Master Bethany or something of sorts. Next, Arother shook his head profusely, and seemed to be put on the spot. The elf had no choice but to sigh and turn around to return to his room. However, he ran into Lin Li. Mage Felix, do allow me to introduce myself. My name is Vidas, and I'm a mage too. It seems you're probably also a pharmacist, and you're purchasing the branch for the sake of using its natural aura to influence the growth of herbs, right? However, you should know that the price of 15 million gold coins has already surpassed its practical value. If you let me have the branch, I promise to supply you with the seeds of some extremely rare herbs. The elf offered a tempting deal that was exceptionally attractive for mages. If the tree branch was really just full of life, Lin Li would definitely agree to it because the elves lived in the Emerald Forest, and they could certainly obtain extraordinary herbs. However, the problem was that the branch was one of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and contained the rule power of nature and earth. It was extremely tempting to Lin Li, and it was a treasure that could not be replaced by anything else. I'm sorry, but this branch is very important for me too. If you'd like to have it, please offer a higher bid. I'll definitely continue bidding for it with you too. Lin Li turned down the elf's offer without hesitation because he had already made up his mind to lay his hands on that piece of debris of the stars, even if it was going to set him back by 30 million or 50 million gold coins. Vidas's goodwill had been turned down. He had never felt so disgusted with humans before. He felt that they were absolutely shameless and foolish for paying a huge and unnecessary price for the sake of pride while causing inconveniences for others. Vidas took a deep breath, tried to suppress his anger, and said to Lin Li, "Mage Felix, you and I are both mages. Since we can't come to a consensus on this issue, why don't we use magic? Whoever obtains victory can take the branch away." Before Lin Li could even answer, Wilkinson stared at Vidas in amusement as if he was staring at an idiot. "Hey, is there something wrong with your brain? This is an auction, not a casino. It's not like President Felix can't afford to pay that price. As long as William seals the deal, we don't even have to vie with you." These elves are really naive, Lin Li thought to himself, feeling extremely amused too. Trying to suppress his laughter, he said, "I'm sorry, Mage Vidas, this item belongs to me until you place a new bid. Since it's mine, why do I have to bet with you?" Vidas could no longer suppress his anger after being rejected again. He humphed, and immediately stormed into the VIP room. Lin Li moved towards the side and stood in front of Wilkinson and the rest to stop them from embarrassing themselves in front of the elf. Wilkinson broke out in a cold sweat. Although pharmacists had high status, there was nothing they could do when it came to people who didn't buy it. There was a sudden magical wave that came from the VIP room, and everyone fell silent immediately. It was too strong, everyone thought the same, including plenty of level 17 and level 18 archmages. They'd clearly already sensed that the massive magical wave was from a legendary figure. The auctioneer William's heart suddenly wrenched up. Is the discussion going to turn into a brawl? That would be terrible for the auction. Most importantly, who was going to pay 10 million gold coins for the tree branch if the paymaster were to flee? Legendary realm. Hilary sprung up from his seat and shifted his gaze onto the VIP room opposite, contemplating if he should intervene. Although he did not feel great about Lin Li, he felt that he ought not to die, since he was the pharmacist Lo spoke highly of. He thought, wait a minute, Lo seemed to have said before that this chap is extremely perverted and sickly talented. I'd better observe how perverted he may be. Arother wanted to step forward to persuade him, but the overpowering aura of the legendary figures made it almost impossible for him to move or speak. He had no choice but to curse in his head. Damn it, these elves have been living out there for a long time. Why are they still so reckless? However, Lin Li did not show any signs of discomfort at all. Instead, he said in a relaxed manner, "But, Mage Vidas, your suggestion is not bad. Of course, I'm not going to give in. How about this? I'll purchase the branch and you can bet items that you think are of equal value later. I wouldn't mind trying my luck then." Upon hearing Lin Li's suggestion, Vidas paused and considered it for a moment before saying, "All right, we'll go ahead with your suggestion." Vidas suddenly lost his confidence and assertiveness, causing plenty of people to feel regretful. They were suppressing his envy and jealousy while waiting to see a good show, yet it ended before it even began. "Master William, you may proceed with the auction. We're giving up," Arother said. "It seems that the problem has already been solved." William heaved a sigh of relief. Although the new record of 15 million gold coins had not been broken, he was content to know that there would be no unnecessary trouble. The item has been successfully auctioned off to President Felix of the Tower of Dusk. Let's congratulate him. He raised the gravel and knocked down forcefully. The auction had finally been completed. Be it sincere or not, everyone in the audience stood up and clapped to celebrate the birth of a new record. However, most of the people paid attention to the VIP rooms upstairs instead. Had the conflict really been resolved? It made them feel rather indignant. Fine, the transaction has been completed. Mage Vidas, what do you plan to use to bet with me? Asked Lin Li, who could tell that the elf was very strong, perhaps even more powerful than him. What Lin Li needed now was a strong opponent. It had been a long time since Lin Li broke through the legendary realm in the abyss of Tharlan. Lin Li had 3 of Juresko's relics, and his accumulations were shockingly massive, especially after his seclusion. Lin Li had even subtly sensed that he had already reached the brink of level 21. He only needed a little bit more to push his power to another realm. However, it bothered Lin Li for a long time. Ever since the seclusion ended, Lin Li discovered that he still needed an opportunity to break through, or rather, he needed a strong opponent. Perhaps the challenge today would push him to level 21. Of course, there were definitely risks involved. Although Lin Li had still yet to witness Vidas' true abilities, he could guess from the strong aura that Vidas exuded that the elf's ability was definitely at least level 21. There was at most a 10% chance of him winning. Not to mention, he still had to stick to the rules. However, Lin Li was not completely unprepared. He had once stood at the pinnacle of the endless world and battled the moon shrine. Hence, he did have some experience in battling with elves. Vidas clearly remembered his elders telling him that humans were the most shameless of all in Amril before he left Emerald Forest. Hence, he had to think of a way not to let the human go back on his word. Castellan Arather, please help us arrange a suitable place to begin the battle. On top of that, Mage Felix, I hope to let the audience witnesses our battle. So, why don't we allow them to be the spectators of our bet? Vidas knew that apart from having poor integrity, humans also placed great emphasis on their pride. Hence, if there were lots of spectators, he wouldn't have to worry about Lin Li going back on his word. Actually, the elves were not the only race that saw humans as sly and scheming beings. Even the demons who often tempted humans into selling their souls racked their brains for the sake of the soul contract, because they did not want to let humans take advantage of them. Hence, every young member of a tribe or race would often be warned against evil humans by an elder before they left. Actually, Vidas was not considered young, even though the elves had extremely long lives. However, he still belonged to the first batch of greenhorn elves, hence, he would inevitably receive pointers from his elders before leaving the Emerald Forest. Vidas, don't you think that nothing can threaten you just because you possess legendary power? Those sly and cunning humans are best at pulling scheming tricks and devising conspiracies to increase their strength. They will pretend to be your friend, win your trust, and convince you to do dangerous things for them. At last, they might even stab you in your chest from the back while pretending to rejoice and celebrate your success with you. Don't believe their promises. Even if they swear to the gods, they might just turn their backs on you and go back on their oaths in the blink of an eye. They have no respect for the gods at all. They only believe in maximizing their own interests, and they will not hesitate to betray even their own brothers for the sake of their personal benefits. The elves who had always considered themselves elegant and refined actually sounded so callous and harsh when describing human beings. Their choice of words was so crude that even listening to them speak was a torture. Vidas was even made to repeat his elders' words several times before they finally felt relieved enough to let him leave the Emerald Forest. Vidas was confident that he would be able to deal with a young human chap with his legendary realm power even if the latter came up with some conspiracy. He felt that no conspiracy would be able to withstand the test of genuine power, and that it would make all of Lin Li's efforts futile. However, throughout his stint in the human world, he had read a lot of historical documents about the human race, and he also knew that the words told by the elders were not groundless. In the history of humans, it was rather common for nations to turn against each other right after signing a treaty, Didas was not afraid that Mage Felix would go back on his word, because there was no way the dead could do so. However, he heard from Arather that Mage Felix was also the owner of the Tower of Dusk and the president of the Guild of Magic of the Breezy Plains. Although he did not regard the Tower of Dusk seriously, the Supreme Council was in great support of the Tower of Dusk. Hence, he requested for more bystanders to be the witnesses of the battle. Although the elves were arrogant, they were not conceited to the point of ignoring everything else and thinking that they were above all. Apophis of the Supreme Council was a strong figure of the sanctuary realm. The elders of the elves, including the Elven Queen, dared not offend the Supreme Council, for no reason. Didas did not wish to cause the Queen and the elders any trouble because of such an insignificant human magician. Hence, his purpose of roping in so many bystanders was to prove to the Supreme Council that the battle was fair. In that case, the Supreme Council would not be able to say anything else to object. Although the bystanders were all humans, Didas was not afraid that they would get into cahoots with them, because everyone knew that internal conflicts were the most rampant amongst humans. Upon hearing that the two people settled the bet just like that, Arather began to get a little anxious. They'd initially thought that Mage Felix was a smart person, and felt that there would be no need for a battle, since he had enough money to buy the auction item. However, no one expected him to take on the bet despite having already bought the item. "Come on, you don't seem like a retarded person. Couldn't you tell that Didas was giving off a legendary aura?" Arather was put on the spot. Things would perhaps not be that terrible if it were another legendary figure. However, the issue was that Didas was not just a legendary mage, but was also an elf. Elves had always harbored animosity for humans. If the other party of the bet was replaced by someone else, such as those mercenary commanders downstairs or the leaders of various organizations, forces, and associations, Arather would feel less conflicted. However, Mage Felix was someone who those leaders could not compare to, even though the Tower of Dusk was not that famous yet. After all, the latter still had the support of the Supreme Council, which helped them with their establishment. Although the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic had only been founded less than a year ago, Lin Li was still the president of the Guild of Magic, and if anything were to happen to him in Roland City, Arather would have a hard time explaining it to the Supreme Council. Regardless of whether the Supreme Council would be concerned or not, Master Felix was not only the president of the Guild of Magic of the Breezy Plains, he was also a pharmacist. William's attitude towards him was clear evidence of how important he was. The very fact that the potion that he had prepared was auctioned at a sky-high price of 10 million gold coins meant that he was obviously not an ordinary pharmacist. He then stared at the senior pharmacists around him and wondered, are these senior pharmacists crazy? Plenty of major forces can't even recruit them no matter how hard they tried, yet they're staying with a small force that had just been established? Arather was sure that William had to know something that he did not. Otherwise, he wouldn't have arranged for Lin Li to sit in the VIP room at the expense of possibly offending the other VIPs. William was almost sucking up to the young mage, and not just intentionally getting close to him. There were only very few people William would suck up to, and Arather was definitely not one of them. Although he had a good reputation in the Breezy Plains, he was well aware of his own status and identity. However, the problem now was that he was completely helpless, because he could persuade neither of the parties. "Master Felix, we can all sit down and talk about what's going on. There's no need to get into such disharmony. You may not know this, but Master Didas has some ties with the Emerald Forest. You just want the branch for the sake of herbs, right? Master Didas can definitely get you any herbs you want from the Emerald Forest," Arather said in a bid to persuade him. He was also trying to hint that Didas was a legendary mage. However, Lin Li not only knew that Didas had legendary strength, but also had seen through his facade, and knew that he was an elf disguised as a human. In fact, if it weren't for the legendary realm power that Didas had exhibited just now, Lin Li wouldn't have bothered with him. The bet was too lame and pointless by his standards, and he felt that it was a complete waste of time. However, Lin Li did not wish to miss a learning opportunity since he had already found out that Didas was a legendary mage. It was a rare chance to have a duel with a legendary mage. Moreover, Lin Li was also very interested in Didas's bet and his treasures. No one would turn down more treasures, though people often said that one ought not to rely too much on the help of external forces in the pursuit of genuine power, especially in the legendary realm, where one had to genuinely be enlightened in order to understand the rule power. However, the effects of treasures could not be ignored, because they could at least allow one to pursue the true meaning of power with greater assurance that would help one keep going. Moreover, what could be considered a treasure by the legendary figures often contained an immense rule power, which was also the reason for the user's increased enlightenment. Of course, Lin Li didn't think that the value of the treasures that Vidas had mentioned could really be compared to that of the branch, which was absolutely valuable because it was one of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. It was the treasure that grew together with the tree of eternity at the beginning of the world. If there were any treasures in this world that could compare to it, it would be one of the other 6 pieces of the debris of the stars. Lin Li smiled nonchalantly after hearing Arathar's attempt at persuasion. Like Vidas, he told Arathar to arrange a suitable venue where they could carry out the battle. He believed that there were plenty of guests who had nothing better to do and would be willing to be the witnesses of the battle. As long as the news of the battle was announced, they would definitely swarm towards the venue. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to hear what he said, Arathar knew that his efforts would be futile even if he were to continue persuading Vidas or Lin Li. Although he did not hear of Vidas' status in the Elven Kingdom before, he knew that the legendary mage Vidas was definitely a big shot in the Elven Kingdom. Arathar could already almost guess the ending of the battle. If Mage Felix had made his achievements in pharmacy while having mediocre power, it would be easy to deal with the matter. However, the problem was that Mage Felix was a real piece of work. He had killed a legendary lich as well as a humorous Wyrm, after all, regardless of what method he used. Even if he were not a legendary mage, he was a very powerful powerhouse. If the 2 powerful parties were to go toe-to-toe against each other, things would definitely get heated in no time, especially since Vidas was an elf, and elves were known to detest humans. It was obvious what would become of Mage Felix in the end. Alright, in that case, please wait a moment while I arrange a venue. Arathar sighed, for all he could do now was pray to the heavens that he wouldn't have to clear up the mess. Filled with anxiety and nervousness, Arathar headed downstairs. The first thing he did was to instruct his subordinates to arrange a venue for the bet before looking for William. After all, he reckoned that William would definitely know Mage Felix better than he did. He thought that William would perhaps have a way to stop the battle. This mysterious treasure that appeared as the finale really did live up to its high expectations, and actually set a sales record of 15 million gold coins. It was the highest set record in the entire land of Amril, and not just in the time consignment store. After the deal was sealed, William suppressed his excitement and announced the end of the auction. However, just as everyone in the audience was about to get up and leave the venue, they unexpectedly saw Castel and Arathar running to the stage anxiously. Upon sight of that scene, everyone couldn't help but stop. Although they didn't come forward to listen to what Arathar and William were saying, they didn't intend to leave, for they were all curious and waiting for something to happen. What? What? William was overwhelmed with dejection after hearing Arathar's words as his joy vanished instantly. Master William, could you think of a way to persuade that Mage Felix? Asked Arathar, who was staring at William with hope in his eyes. William glanced down at the audience, who were waiting to see a commotion, after which he pulled Arathar to the side of the stage and said softly yet resentfully, Arathar, you should know the rules of the auction. How could you take someone to look for Mage Felix? Aren't you creating trouble for me? You should have seen the scene when the potion was auctioned just now. Mage Felix is not an ordinary mage. There are a lot of distinguished VIPs at this auction. Why did you think I arranged for him to sit in the VIP room? Smiling wryly, Arathar said, why couldn't I tell that? Things have already come to this. You should have heard what happened upstairs, just now. No matter how impressive Mage Felix may be, he's only in his 20s, after all. You'd better help to persuade him. Persuade? How? Mage Felix has properly used his money to purchase the items, and he has really spent 15 million gold coins. Do you want me to persuade him to give away something that he has bought with his own money to someone named Vidas, or simply forfeit this auction and sell the item to Vidas? William did not expect Arthur to create such a twist of events just as he thought that the auction was going to come to a perfect close. He was fuming beyond words, so much so that even his beard began to quiver. However, Arthur was still the castellan of Roland City, after all, and William couldn't just berate him harshly. Although William did not want to get involved, he still needed Mage Felix to help him concoct the potions based on the Dark Age formulae that he had given to the latter a few days ago. Besides, he was the one who had invited Mage Felix to the auction, and both he and Arthur would be held responsible if something were to go wrong. Regardless of whether or not he could persuade Mage Felix, he still had to give it a try. No longer bothering to care about the auction, William and Arthur frantically scurried to the VIP room on the second floor where Lin Li was seated. The guests who had yet to leave immediately thought about the formidable aura that had been exhibited just now. Although everyone downstairs had not seen anything back then, they had already guessed what was going on after thinking about their bidding conversation. It was undoubtedly a nouveau riche show-off who was trying to brag but ended up encountering a legendary figure and facing a tragic end. Or so they thought. Those who were long green with envy were obviously not going to miss the chance to watch a good show. They were all craning their necks and looking upstairs in a bid to catch a good glimpse. Sienna stood among them, disdainfully thinking, damn it, a bunch of bumpkins and silly folks. Back then, Mage Felix completely destroyed a legendary lich and a humorous WYRM. William headed upstairs in a bid to persuade them. However, the outcome was obvious, and he knew that nothing he said would stop the two from fighting it out today. William and Arthur looked at each other helplessly in dismay. They had no choice but to do as Lin Li and Vidas asked. Arthur was responsible for arranging the venue, while William announced to everyone that a duel would begin. Contrary to William's and Arthur's concerns, the guests downstairs began applauding loudly after hearing that there was going to be a battle between a legendary figure and nouveau riche. While William and Arthur were praying that nothing would happen, those downstairs were hoping that the owner of the Tower of Dusk would be taught a lesson by the legendary powerhouse. That way, the success rate would definitely increase greatly when they went to recruit those pharmacists again. Arthur was the castellan of Roland City, which could be considered to belong to him. It was too easy to arrange a venue for the bet. Considering that Vidas was a legendary mage, while Mage Felix was extremely strong too, Arthur decided to arrange the venue to be in the Harvest Square. The Harvest Square was situated in the center of Roland City. When looked at from above, the entire city would be centered around the Harvest Square, and seem like a spider web that spread outwards. The Harvest Square was called a square, but it was not like other open space plazas, though it was not completely covered, either. The area covered by the Harvest Square was about the size of 10 football fields. It was surrounded by 84 stone pillars, all of which were more than 10 meters tall. There were complicated magewefts carved on every pillar to prevent the overzealous warriors from damaging the surrounding architecture. The square was oval, and there were 2 4-story high viewing decks on 2 ends, while the other 2 sides were open. It allowed one to look opposite, hence, there would be no obstructions when not in use. After the magewefts on the stone pillars were activated, the strong preventive aura would cover the entire square. The square, which had been built more than 1,000 years ago, had always been a place that people used for making offerings to gods and deities. During every harvest season, there would be a series of offerings and sacrificial rituals, which would comprise a special performance that was a favorite of many. It was a gladiatorial battle that allowed everyone to showcase their dauntlessness and bravery. The gladiatorial competition had originally been a dance performance in the sacrificial event where the appearance of ugly beasts and demons symbolized various disasters. Led by heroes, humans began to rise and retaliate before finally gaining victory by defeating the menacing beasts. However, humans also gradually began to get greedier, for they could no longer be satisfied with the monsters that were played by humans during the performance. Hence, they began to use real beasts, which were subsequently replaced by magical beasts, in the celebration. Over time, man versus man gladiatorial competitions were introduced to the celebration. The sacrificial ceremony for the goddess of abundance was the most solemn and important annual festival in Roland City. Wrestling and gladiatorial competitions had gradually become the highlight of these events too. At the beginning, gladiatorial fights were only meant for some death row prisoners to fight for a chance to have their death penalty cancelled. However, humans soon discovered a shocking truth: the surviving prisoners would also receive unimaginably massive fame and wealth. As a result, gladiators became a profession, and the prisoners would also get a chance to change their destiny. The gladiatorial field had become a renowned venue, and the victorious gladiators would receive invitations to join various forces in addition to a massive monetary reward. Although Arather knew that Vidas was an elf, while Mage Felik was rather powerful as well, he still had some faith in the defensive mageweths in the square. The mageweths on the pillars surrounding the harvest square had already been activated, thus covering the initially grotesque pillars in a faint, blue luminescent glow. The pillars seemed to be linked together by an undetectable membrane that shielded the square from the viewing decks. All of the guests followed them to the harvest square. Although pharmacists had a high societal status, and people dared not provoke them at all, that did not mean that no one was jealous of them, especially since they were forced to respect the pharmacists. Humans would definitely feel thrilled to see someone else being braver than them and dealing with the person they detested. Those people had been feeling jealous of Lin Li for more than just a day of two. They had been green with envy ever since they found out that the Tower of Dusk had successfully recruited numerous senior pharmacists, especially after seeing the potions concocted by them being auctioned off at sky-high prices. They wished they could strangle the scoundrel Lin Li. Although one of the potions might not be worth 10 million gold coins, the origin potion concocted by Wilkinson was definitely worth the 4 million gold coins that it had been sold for. Coupled with the previous batch of potions, the massive wealth that the Tower of Dusk had generated from this auction alone was enough to make others crazily jealous. All of the senior pharmacists were solely working for the Tower of Dusk, and none of them was willing to get poached even after all the hefty gifts that they had received from the various forces, all of whom they rejected without hesitation. Hence, they were all feeling resentful and jealous of Lin Li. The last straw was Lin Li's 15 million gold coin purchase of the branch that was inconspicuous in the eyes of others. In the eyes of those people, Lin Li was simply being too arrogant, and they all hoped that someone would teach him a lesson for being haughty. The Harvest Square was used to hold celebrations. Although almost 2,000 people had filled the Elven Theater, the same number only occupied a small area in the stands of the Harvest Square. However, the other seats were not left empty either, because some had long seen the mageweths being activated, and knew that a good show would be put up soon. It didn't take long for the stands on both sides to be filled up. As instructed by Arather, large amounts of magical crystals were continuously added to the energy core of the mageweth, maximizing its power. Although Arather was worried, there was nothing he could do apart from hoping that Mage Felik could save himself. Since the battle had to happen anyway, he could only hope that no one died. William and Arather had already resigned themselves to fate because they were well aware that even though the battle was open and there were plenty of witnesses, none of Mage Felik's supporters, be it the Supreme Council or whatever, would bother to consider if it were a fair contest if something were to happen to him. Actually, everyone including Arather and William had already guessed what the outcome would be, and they all felt that the arrogant nouveau riche would end up losing his life. He was just 20 years old. Even if he were extremely talented in magic, how could he compare to the legendary Juresko? Juresko was the god of mages no one could compare to. They refused to believe that anyone in the world of Anril could come close to Juresko's level, let alone surpass him. The defensive aura that shielded the square seemed to have given it a crystal cover. For the battle, Lin Li and Vidas stood in the middle of the square, keeping a distance of about 100 meters away from each other. Those who were knowledgeable also discovered that the energy field of the defensive mageweth in the square had already been activated to the highest limit by Arather, who did not care about the wear and tear. The energy required to support such a strong defensive energy field was a lot. A level 10 magical crystal would be depleted in the blink of an eye, and level 15 magical crystals were required to support it even for a while. Many people thought that Arather was making a mountain out of molehill, because they felt that the defensive energy field was strong enough to withstand even an attack by a legendary figure. However, the issue was it necessary? Although everyone knew that the mage who was preparing to vent for everyone else was a legendary mage, how much of his power could he be forced to exhibit? Even an archmage who had reached the pinnacle would not be able to fight a legendary mage. If it were just for the sake of watching the gladiatorial competition, the people around the stage wouldn't bother to stay behind, because they were certain of what the outcome would be. In order for a battle to be interesting, both opponents would have to be of equal power. Otherwise, the significantly stronger party would easily destroy his incompetent opponent, and there wouldn't be any show. The magical geniuses who everyone in the breezy plains recognized were Hutton from the Manhwa family and Stephen from the Dark Blade, both of whom became archmages when they were in their 20s. The two had already been recognized as elite mages. No one knew that mages relied on enlightenment and luck to get to the legendary realm. Hence, everyone reckoned that Mage Felix of the Tower of Dusk was probably at most a level 15 or 16 mage, even if he really were a genius. After the battle began, the legendary mage would be able to destroy the arrogant upstart effortlessly. Hence, Arother was just wasting his resources by using so many magical crystals for defense. The replenishment of energy in the defensive energy field made everyone feel amused, and some guests around the stage had even started betting on how long the battle would last. However, everyone still found it to be rather pointless, and most felt that it would end within seconds. Why is Arother going through all that hassle? What a waste of everyone's time. There's no need to set up this defensive mageweth at all, because that Felix probably won't even get to put up a fight, the guests thought to themselves in frustration, unable to understand why Arother was being so conscientious. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Since it involved a gamble, they naturally had to inform the notary public of the stake clearly. Otherwise, the people wouldn't know what happened after the fight came to an end. How could they be the witnesses then? Vidas glanced at Lin Li, who was standing at a short distance away, and raised his chin with a look of arrogance on his face. He slowly said, I, Vidas Delisma, invite you to a battle on behalf of the Elven Delisma family. We'll use this gamble to decide the final outcome and the fateful owner of my elven treasure, the branch of the Tree of Eternity. Although they were rather far away from the viewing deck, their conversation could still be heard clearly by everyone on the viewing deck. As soon as they heard Vidas' words, an uproar instantly broke out on stage. Everyone, including the big shots who had attended the auction and gossip mongers who were just interested in watching a show, all knew that Arother could become the Castellan, all thanks to the support by the elves. However, even after all these years, there was almost no one who had ever seen an elf. In fact, people even began to wonder what the actual situation was back then. It was time for those who came from the auction to hear the name of the unassuming branch straight from Vidas' mouth. It was no wonder that it was sold at an insanely high price of 15 million gold coins, for it was a branch from the Tree of Eternity. It was an entity that was formed at the beginning of the world, and every leaf and branch of the Tree of Eternity, which was full of vitality, was absolutely precious and valuable. Although everyone was very surprised, they all yearned for the so-called eternal branch. However, it was priced at 15 million gold coins, hence, it was not something that they could afford to covet. Of course, that also made them feel even more jealous of the arrogant upstart, though they reckoned that he definitely wouldn't leave the square in one piece. To everyone's surprise, Arother, who was supposed to be the closest to the elves, actually stood up after hearing the self-proclaimed elf Vidas' words. Everyone knew by now that the elf named Vidas was brought to the auction by Castellan Arother. Through the fact that Arother inherited the position of the lord of the city, the close relationship between him and the elves became a widely known fact in the breezy plains. However, why did he behave that way at this moment? Arother soon discovered that he was not behaving appropriately. He coughed awkwardly and returned to his seat. William, who was seated at the side, seemed to be deep in thought. When Arother took a seat, he hesitantly asked, Arother, Delisma sounds familiar to me. Could it be? Everyone was feeling surprised and bewildered about Vidas being an elf as well as the branch of the Tree of Eternity, whose name they had just learned. They did not feel anything much about Delisma family. However, not everyone understood the elven kingdom well. Arother knew a bit about the Elven Kingdom since he had interacted with the elves for several years. In fact, Arother had already realized that Vidas had an extraordinary status in the Elven Kingdom, though he did not expect him to be a member of the Delisma family. Arother began to get increasingly worried. If Vidas were a low-level elf instead, he would perhaps think twice before taking action, but since he was from the Delisma family. Upon hearing William's question, Arother knew that he definitely couldn't fool the knowledgeable authenticator and appraiser, William. He slowly turned to look at him and explained, "Master William, Vidas' true identity, I actually didn't know about it beforehand. Had I known earlier?" "So what if you knew earlier? Would it make a difference?" William snapped. All he could think about now after watching Arother nod was that Mage Felix had to be in hot soup. Arother knew that he was at fault too. Although the two parties were bent on carrying out the battle, the entire problem stemmed from the fact that he had presumptuously brought Vidas to look for the buyer. That behavior of his had already flouted the rules of the auction. Lin Li then openly purchased the branch with his own money. Yet, Vidas asked for it back. After failing to purchase the item or snatch it, Vidas even had the cheek to make him surrender the item. That was another violation of the rules. Staring at the middle of the square, where the two parties were getting ready to hit each other, Arother began to feel troubled and worried. Since Vidas belonged to the Delisma family, he probably had a higher status in the Elven Kingdom than they had imagined. However, the more powerful Vidas was, the less hesitant he would be about taking action, since he would less likely to be held accountable for his actions. In that case, Arother would be held liable if the Supreme Council were to pursue the matter. Arother was not overthinking it. As the Castellan of Roland City, he often interacted with all sorts of people from the aristocratic circles. For example, an aristocratic heir would not get into trouble for killing another person with some background. Instead, his assistant would take the blame for failing to persuade his master against the matter. Hence, it was obvious that the Supreme Council would definitely put the blame on Arother, and not the Delisma family or the well-connected William. The problem was, what kind of background did this Mage Felix have? That was a factor that affected his learning. The auction was supposed to come to a perfect end. Yet, a sudden twist occurred. William rubbed his forehead and looked at the two of them. Those who had studied the Dark Age before would definitely be familiar with the Delisma family of elves. It was an important last name in the Dark Age. During the Dark Age, the High Elves ruled the entire world of Anrel, and the elves became the slaves of the High Elves because they fitted the latter's beauty standards. The Delismas were one of the 6 greatest families of the Elven Kingdom, and had always been a family of geniuses. Although they'd still ended up being slaves in that era, the appearance of an elf changed their entire circumstances. The name of that elf was Hollis's Delisma, a name which rarely appeared in the history of the Dark Age. However, his nickname was rather well known, for he was the famous Helios. The elf Hollis's Delisma was named Helios by the Elven Queen, and the Delisma family was then named the Helios family. Bloodline and hierarchy mattered greatly to the High Elves. Hence, it was 10 times harder for them to change and receive something compared to the ordinary elves. Yet, Hollis managed to earn the title of the Helios just because of his capabilities, despite his identity of a lowly elf. Apart from being very competent, he had put in plenty of effort as well. Since Vidas belonged to the Delisma family, one could only imagine how high of a status he had in the Elven Kingdom. Although he was not as authoritative as the elders, the gap was a result of many different factors. Even in the Elven Kingdom that advocated nature, it was impossible for everyone to be equal. Although the Elven Kingdom was known as a kingdom to outsiders, the internal management was actually the same as that of a tribal alliance. Second to the queen, the elders were actually like leaders of the tribes, and there were various authorities who had varying powers amongst the tribe. Those directly determined the right of an elder to speak. After the Dark Age, the elves faced an attack carried out by various races, which almost exterminated them. The Delisma family did not escape that fate at all. In fact, to some extent, the reason why various races tried to destroy the elves was because of the Helios family. During that crisis, the Delismas incurred huge losses, and there were only a few hundreds of elves out of the entire elven tribe which fled to the Emerald Forest. The prominent Delisma family was obviously one of them. However, for the elves, it was not the population of a race that determined the strength of a group, but the blood of the members of the family. As one of the 6 greatest elven families, the Delismas proved themselves to be outstanding. Therefore, even if the Delisma family only had one elf left back then, the family's bloodline did not vanish. Hence, it was only a matter of time before they rose again. The Emerald Forest was the best place for the elves to live in. It was an excellent place for recuperation after being attacked by humans. More than 1,300 years had passed since the end of the Dark Age by now. It was difficult to imagine the extent to which the Delisma had developed. In the middle of the harvest square, Lin Li remained still and composed even after hearing the famous name of the Delisma family, which Vidas introduced proudly. If the debris of the stars was called the branch of the tree of eternity, Lin Li could be only amused. If he were to calculate it in detail, the new piece of the debris of the stars and the tree of eternity could be said to be twins. Lin Li was truly interested in the stake that Vidas mentioned, which the latter claimed to be equal in value to the branch of the tree of eternity. The value of the branch was exorbitant. Hence, he reckoned that the arrogant elf wouldn't fool him with some garbage. Mage Vidas, can you take out your stake now? Since you want to battle me, you ought to let me see what you have to offer. Lin Li ignored his introduction, and instead inquired about the other side's wager. In fact, just like the people who were watching, Vidas didn't think that there'd be any suspense in this fight, because humans were naturally less talented than elves, and since Lin Li was much younger than him, he felt that Lin Li would have at most practiced magic for only 10-odd years if he started to learn magic from a sensible age. The time Vidas had spent since arriving at the legendary realm alone was much longer than the time Lin Li had spent learning magic. Although Vidas did not think it was necessary for Lin Li to look at the stake, there was no need for him to be so calculative about such trivial matters. He gave it some consideration, and reckoned that the treasure would be returned to him at the end of the day anyway. Hence, he decided to showcase the most valuable one since it was just for show. At the thought of it, Vidas glanced at Lin Li, who was opposite him, and humphed before whipping out a magic staff that had a length of 50 to 60 centimeters. The dark red magic staff had a white tip that was embellished with gemstones. When Vidas whipped out his magic staff, Lin Li's left eyelid began to twitch, despite being someone who had seen plenty of what the world had to offer. Although the surging magical power in the staff could not compare to that of the debris of the stars, it was indeed a treasure. This staff is the scepter of Helios left behind by the ancestors of the Delisma family. I believe its value is enough for it to become a stake in this battle. Vidas held onto the gemstone on the top of the staff. The value of Helios's scepter in his heart was even higher than that of the branch. In fact, Vidas knew that Lin Li had to be rather knowledgeable in order to become the president of a local guild of magic. During the auction earlier on, he accidentally exuded his powerful aura in a moment of impatience. He reckoned that even a fool must have already estimated his abilities, what more a human mage. But why did Lin Li still initiate the battle? Clearly, it was because he knew that he had some abilities and solutions that he could use to defeat a legendary powerhouse. However, Vidas was not a novice legendary mage. Hence, he was well aware of the gap between an archmage and a legendary mage. He knew that it could not be closed easily. In fact, when it came to the special means of advancing in strength, there were not many other methods apart from potions and spells that would stimulate one's potential to advance in level. For example, a warrior might get to advance and gain massive mana through a mental spell. He reckoned that Mage Felik must have relied on potions to advance in level, especially since he had a legion of pharmacists with him. However, the problem was that the distance between a legendary mage and an archmage was not measured by their differences in mana, but by their difference in knowledge and understanding of the rule power. No matter how hard one tried to increase their mana, it would be impossible to close the gap between an archmage and a legendary mage without understanding the rule power well enough. Vidas did not think that a potion that would allow one to directly advance to the legendary realm actually existed in this world. Even those pharmacists who claimed to be omnipotent would not be able to formulate such heavenly potions. Perhaps the legendary pharmaceutics gurus would be able to concoct such extraordinary potions, but there was no pharmaceutics guru amongst the pharmacists in Anril. The reason Vidas could use Helios Scepter as a bet without concern was because he was confident that Lin Li wouldn't be invincible even if he had a potion that would lead him directly to the legendary realm. In fact, he would be insignificant compared to Vidas, who had entered the legendary realm hundreds of years ago. However, entering the legendary realm did not mean that one had crossed the threshold and would be able to enjoy smooth sailing in the future. In fact, every advancement in power would require another level of understanding of the rule power, and the difficulty of each point of progress was no less than the threshold preceding it. Therefore, a legendary mage would still have a hard time advancing further after entering the legendary realm. Vidas had already been in the legendary realm for hundreds of years, and had already got to level 22. However, he was vastly stronger than when he'd first entered the legendary realm. Hence, Vidas was not at all worried. Regardless of what tricks Lin Li pulled, it would be impossible for him to surpass Vidas by advancing 3 more levels after entering the legendary realm. His true intention in putting Helios Scepter at stake was because he wanted to use this invincible magic staff to bring out the greed existing within humans. Even William, the host of the auction, did not know the specific information about the branch of the Tree of Eternity. However, he guessed from the exterior appearance and aura of the branch that it was likely to be a piece lost by the elves over 1,000 years ago. It had been bestowed to the queen as a treasure that she could keep with her wherever she went. After the end of the Dark Age, the elves met with their biggest calamity, and the branch disappeared. Whether it had been retrieved from the Tree of Eternity or not, that actually was not important. The pure and natural aura within it was the reason Vidas was bent on getting it. With the exception of Legolas, who specialized in fire magic, most of the elven mages practiced nature spells. When Vidas reached the legendary realm, he was allowed to create his own magical domain. He then created a nature domain. Judging from the natural aura of the branch, it was extremely beneficial for the nature domains of elves. If Vidas could incorporate the branch into his natural domain, he would effortlessly break through to level 23. In fact, advancing to level 24 would be possible too. Every advancement in any realm above the legendary realm would become extremely challenging. Plenty of extraordinarily talented legendary mages never got to the sanctuary realm, despite having used up their entire lifetime to attempt it. Vidas had already lived for almost 1,000 years, which was a common phenomenon amongst the elves because they enjoyed long lifespans. However, after they entered the legendary realm, there was little to no difference between them and human legendary mages. He had stayed in his current realm for several months, but could actually already tell that it would be difficult for him to advance further. The branch had now become all of his hope. When Vidas whipped out Helios Scepter and introduced it, all of the big shots, including Arathur and William, as well as the leaders of the smaller forces, gasped in shock and fascination. Although they did not know of the elven Delisma family, they definitely knew of Helios Scepter. This staff was a well-known piece of magical equipment during the Dark Age, especially during the later years of it. After the Dark Age ended, humans attacked the elves, but the Helios Scepter dealt great damage to the human forces. Hence, Helios Scepter was described and mentioned rather frequently in plenty of war reports at that time. Of course, when Vidas mentioned Helios Scepter, everyone suddenly remembered and thought about the surname Delisma. The humble elf who was born as a slave managed to become known as Helios, recognized by the elven queen, all based on his own abilities and hard work. Later on, she even personally gifted him the scepter. He was a member of the Delisma family, and since then, his family became raved about in Anril during the Dark Age. William shook his head resignedly, and stared at the figures in the middle of the square. Helios Scepter was indeed a tempting treasure to mages, but the problem was that Lin Li had to win the battle against Vidas, who was a legendary mage who held Helios Scepter. Was there even a need to proceed with the battle? However, both William and Arathur were powerless at this point. All they could do was pray that the elven mage Vidas would refrain from going overboard on the account of the Supreme Council. Anyway, they were betting items, and there was no need to take each other's life. The energy fluctuations exhibited by Helios' scepter had really aroused Lin Li's interest. The set of inviting lines was recited by him in front of everyone, thus signifying the official start of the battle. Upon hearing that Lin Li had accepted the battle, Vidas sneered coldly in contempt. Although he did not overestimate his own abilities like Lin Li did in his opinion, he did not hesitate to launch his attack. A strong magical wave instantly surrounded the entire square. That was the so-called dominance of a level 22 legendary mage. It even caused a massive energy whirlpool in the air over the square. It was a virgin experience for many of the spectators, for they had never witnessed the powers of a legendary powerhouse before. In their imagination, legendary mages were just one level higher than level 19 archmages, and calling them legendary was just a form of address. However, after watching what Vidas had just done, they finally realized how ridiculous they were in their assumptions. They could tell just by looking that Vidas was extremely formidable, so much so that they began to shudder in fear, especially the ones who were weaker. They dared not imagine what it would be like to face his wrath. At this moment, Vidas had already removed his disguising spell and exposed his true identity. Since it was a battle, and there had to be spectators and witnesses, there would be no point in concealing his identity anymore. Although the feud between Helios and humans had already ended centuries ago, Vidas did not plan to simply win the battle. He wanted to use this opportunity to declare to everyone that the glory of the Vidas family had yet to end. Those who had the audacity to offend Helios' family would face severe punishment. Vidas' performance shattered every last bit of Arathar's hopes. It was a battle between a legendary mage and a supposed archmage. Was there a need to go to such great lengths just for the sake of winning? They're indeed different from humans. Can't they spare a thought for humans who can't fathom their logic? Arathar began to regret his decision. Who would have thought that a broken branch would cause so much trouble? If it were other elves instead of Vidas, he perhaps wouldn't agree to hosting the battle and save himself some face. However, Vidas was a descendant of Helios. William was just as dejected. He closed his eyes slightly and leaned backwards against the seat, for he no longer wanted to watch the battle that was going on in the middle of the square. There was no doubt or suspense at all. All efforts and scheming tricks would be rendered useless in front of a strong legendary mage. Although Mage Felik was an accomplished pharmacist, there didn't exist a potion that would allow him to enter the legendary realm directly. Vidas was an elf who had been in the legendary realm for numerous years. Hence, a beginner legendary figure could not compare to him at all. Besides, William had never heard of a powerful potion that would allow one to directly enter the legendary realm. If it really existed, he was certain that people would vie to the very end for that potion even if it were auctioned at 150 million gold coins. Almost everyone on both viewing decks had prepared to watch the battle. They were all very sure that the young human mage, Lin Li, would be horribly defeated by the legendary elven mage with just a simple and effortless spell. Wilkinson and the other pharmacists were the only ones who were nervously staring at the middle of the square, though Wilkinson had already made up his mind to go back immediately and seek Balba for help if anything were to happen to Lin Li. He was bent on making Castellan Arathar and Vidas pay for what they had done. After spending time learning from Lin Li, Wilkinson and the other pharmacists had long been convinced by Lin Li's pharmaceutical knowledge and respected him for it. They absolutely believed that he knew everything about pharmaceutics, but they were not confident in his magical skills. No matter how gifted one might be, his energy would still be limited, especially since Lin Li had just turned 20 years old. Since he had already attained so much knowledge and accomplishments in pharmaceutics at such a young age, how could he have had the energy to learn magic properly? Those pharmaceutics masters who had legendary abilities did not pick their skills up over just 1 or 2 days. Most of them started by learning magic first and used their magical abilities to bring them to the legendary realm, where they enjoyed increased longevity, after which they started to learn about pharmaceutics. Wilkinson and the other pharmacists could not bring themselves to watch the battle any longer. However, they could all tell that the elven mage Vidas was out to kill. They were certain that Lin Li would lose the battle, hence, they were considering how they should take revenge for him. Sienna was the only person who had faith and immense confidence in Lin Li, and, unlike the rest, felt that Lin Li would win the battle. He thought, damn it, so what if he's a legendary figure? Does he know that Mage Felix had already destroyed a legendary lich and a humorous WYRM 1 year ago? He can definitely take on a legendary elven mage. Yet, all of these people are betting on how long it will take for Vidas to destroy Felix. What a bunch of fools. In Sienna's opinion, the combination of a legendary lich and humorous WYRM was the most powerful one in the legendary realm. Hence, he felt that no one would pose a threat to Lin Li, even if he was a formidable elven legendary mage. Everyone had a common opinion, there would ultimately be a distinct winner in the battle, though Sienna's candidate was different from the rest. Hence, when someone he knew asked him if he wanted to bet how long Lin Li would last, Sienna asked, "Can I bet on Mage Felix winning?" "Leader Sienna, you are too humorous. We were all feeling oppressed at first, but you really cracked us up," said the person next to Sienna. "My foot. I'm for real. Is there such a bet?" "I'll bet on Mage Felix winning," Sienna said in annoyance. "Wait. What did you say?" that person said while suppressing his laughter and staring at Sienna in shock. "Cut the crap. Do you dare to take on the bet or not?" "I'm betting 500,000 gold coins. Mage Felix will win," Sienna exclaimed, disregarding the power of Vidas. After witnessing and experiencing the power of a lich, he could take more shock than others. In everyone's opinion, Sienna was just acting like an idiot. They could not figure out how a fool like him managed to win the favor of Castellan Arathor, who even appointed him as the leader of the top mercenary corps regiment in Roland City. There was such a stark contrast between Vidas and Lin Li, yet Sienna failed to see it. He ought to have sensed the formidable aura of the legendary Vidas. 500,000 gold coins. "You said it yourself," said Jefferson, a gambling addict who monopolized several gambling dens in Roland City. He was initially just joking. However, after hearing that Sienna was willing to bet 500,000 gold coins, he decided to take on the bet without hesitation. "Fine, I'll hold you to your word and start the bet for you." It was as good as free money. Is Sienna's brain fried? Everyone surrounding him was actively discussing him. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins were bet on Vidas winning. They were not trying to earn any money, but rather were trying to embarrass the nouveau riche of Roland City. Actually, there was no longer a need for the bet anymore. Sienna was the only one who bet on Lin Li winning. Those who bet on the legendary mage Vidas winning were expecting to gain more than 2 million gold coins effortlessly. Sienna obviously knew that they were staring at him like a fool. However, he sneered, and thought to himself, "Come on, keep placing your bets. We'll see who really is the fool." The news soon spread like wildfire on the stage, and the stakes were continuously rising. In fact, Sienna hoped that Lin Li would dawdle before launching his attack. By the time they were done, he could perhaps win 10 million gold coins. Lin Li had seen and dealt with plenty of legendary powerhouses before. In fact, he even got insulted by Apophis, a figure of the sanctuary realm, on the day that he became the chairman of the Guild of Magic. However, regardless of how Burnside, Apophis, or Sendros undermined him, he would often be confident about how much he could take. Although the Lord of Darkness was fierce, he had lost his sentience, after all, and the Crimson Dragon had been imprisoned in the underground palace for more than 1,000 years. When faced with the aura of a level 22 legendary mage, Lin Li could clearly sense the huge impact on the transfer of his magical power, which was far less smooth than usual. However, Lin Li was not a normal level 20 legendary mage, after all. He didn't study the Book of Eternity for so long for no reason. Besides, he had extraordinary mental strength that would allow him to exhibit his powers when faced with an oppressive level 22 legendary mage. Just as everyone was placing their bet and mocking Sienna, there was a sudden burst of energy in the Harvest Square, and everyone instantly fell silent. Apart from Sienna, everyone was dumbfounded. Since there were only 2 people in the square and Vidas had already exhibited his power, whom could that energy come from? William stood up with surprise written all over his face. It was definitely the aura of a legendary figure. Could it be that the young mage Felix is also a legendary mage, in addition to being an accomplished pharmacist? Unbelievable. He's only 20 years old. It was way beyond their imagination. At this moment, Arthur, who was still feeling rather worried, thought differently from William. He did not stop worrying just because of Lin Li's sudden outburst. He frowned and stared blankly at the middle of the square. No matter how formidable mage Felix might be, he still wouldn't faze Arthur even if he were a sanctuary master. Lin Li's sudden outburst made Vidas feel rather astonished. He'd initially thought that Lin Li was just trying to use a potion to increase his abilities. To his surprise, the human mage Felix managed to hide his power very well. He turned out to be a legendary mage. However, even then, Vidas still did not feel any less confident about winning. There are still differences between legends. Vidas remained calm and composed as if he were speaking to himself. He then waved Helios' scepter in his hand and caused waves to form in the surface of the water. The harvest square was paved with hard and durable lapis lazuli, though there were small gaps in between the tiles. The ground of the square was smooth like the surface of rivers during winter. However, the smooth, hard, and flat ground was quickly stained with green after Vidas released his nature domain. The tender grass grew wildly on the hard lazuli tiles and covered the entire square in the blink of an eye. Everyone in the breezy plains was not new to such a sight. However, they could not help but feel shocked to witness it in the harvest square. The elves were undoubtedly lovers of nature as evidenced from their beautiful natural magic and domain. The grass stopped growing when it reached waist level. However, there were several shoots which grew in the patches of grass rapidly. They seemed to have shot up from the ground and grown into huge trees. At this moment, the harvest square turned from a patch of grass into a dense forest. All it lacked was some birds and bees. When Vidas showcased his nature domain, it was just like a wet blanket for William, whose heart sank to rock bottom. Legendary mages who could create their own magical domains were at least level 21 and above. Vidas' natural domain was clearly not newly created. In other words, he had to be above level 21. What about mage Felix, who had continuously been suppressed by Vidas' aura? When Lin Li exhibited his power, those who were betting on Vidas winning were shocked, and began to doubt their conjecture. They began to wonder just whom they should bet on. Those who bet on mage Felix would only win 500,000 gold coins from Sienna, while those who bet on Vidas would very likely obtain nearly 3 million gold coins. In other words, if Felix were to win, Sienna would get to keep 3 million gold coins. However, when they were hesitating, Vidas exhibited the nature domain that he'd created, and turned the entire harvest square into a dense forest in the blink of an eye. Although birds were missing, he was definitely not inferior to the young mage Lin Li. Hence, everyone felt much more confident. Not only did they increase their bets, they even bet on Vidas winning. They didn't care for a few hundred gold coins, but they felt that it would be a good idea to embarrass the nouveau riche of Roland City. Sienna was still worried that they might change their minds. To his surprise, the elf Vidas exhibited his nature domain, which made them stop hesitating. The bets then increased rapidly to 5 million gold coins, like the sprouting shoots in the nature domain. Damn it, how can there be such a wonderful deal in this world? They're actually giving me money voluntarily. Sienna thought to himself gleefully, not at all worried that Lin Li might lose. He was not worried that Lin Li would lose, because he was a ruthless person who had managed to break through even the legendary Lich's humorous domain. What damage could a mere forest do? All of the bystanders on the viewing deck, including Wilkinson and the rest, were certain that Lin Li would lose, unlike Sienna, who remained positive. Back then, Uchfalusi gave him too strong of an emotional trauma. Since then, Uchfalusi had become his greatest fear. Since Lin Li could defeat the terrifying demon, the former was obviously deemed invincible by Sienna. Actually, Sienna was rather similar to Wilkinson and the other pharmacists, who felt that Lin Li could solve all pharmaceutical problems. The only difference was that Sienna saw Lin Li as an invincible mage. He was Lin Li's diehard fan. At this moment, Lin Li had already flown up into the sky and was suspended in the air, with a thick and dense forest beneath him. The leaves rustled in the wind, and seemed to resemble waves in an emerald sea. Vidas's power indeed did not disappoint Lin Li, who reckoned that Elf should be a level 22 legendary mage. Lin Li's true abilities were actually only at level 20. However, a level 22 legendary mage did not intimidate him at all. He felt that if he were to always compare himself to someone weaker, he would never, ever make any progress. Only by competing with a stronger opponent would he train and improve. Opponents were sometimes rarer than friends, especially for legendary figures who would rarely be able to find a suitable opponent who could let them exert all their power without consideration. Besides, such opponents would usually be useful only once. After Vidas released his nature domain, the entire harvest square was filled with waste-level grass and trees which blocked the view. Had Lin Li not flown up into the air, it would have been impossible for the audience to even catch a glimpse. They felt rather dissatisfied because they could not see anything. However, at that moment, the dense trees shook vigorously and swayed from side to side before standing up from the ground. They turned into ancient war trees, which were guardians of the elves. Although they had freshly sprouted, the wrinkled bark made them look aged. Those trees were deemed as the guardians of elves after the elves fled into the emerald forest while being chased by large armies. The hundreds of elves who fortunately survived the ordeal no longer had the means to retaliate. At this moment, the goddess of forest showed her miracle and turned century-old trees into trees of war, which helped the elves defeat the tens of thousands of men of coalition forces that chased them down. However, there was also another theory, which suggested that the trees of war were actually indigenous to the emerald forest, and had surfaced during the same age as the dragons and titans. After the elves entered the emerald forest, they broke into the territory of the trees of war and reached a certain consensus with them. The trees of war agreed to provide some shelter for the elves. At the same time, that also explained the other theory of ManhwaRecap giving the emerald forest to the elves. Of course, it did not matter which theory was real, because the truth was that the trees of war were strong guardians of the elves, and made it impossible for any other forces to harm the emerald forest. Although the power of the trees of war was extremely strong, they would never leave the emerald forest. Otherwise, just with these hundreds of trees of war, the elves would have enough strength to wipe out all humans. The trees of war had been around for tens of thousands of years, and each of them had incredible strength that could compare to that of dragons. However, for the elves, the power of the trees of war was not the most important. Although the trees of war had always been bound to emerald forest, their long lives allowed them to accumulate extremely profound knowledge. The elves were originally the slaves of the high elves. Although they were not forbidden from learning magic, the magic they had learned was actually the same as what humans learned. However, after entering the emerald forest, they were not only shielded by the trees of war, they even learned the nature magic that was more suitable for their race from the trees of war. At this moment, the trees of war which had been born in Vidas's nature domain naturally weren't the actual trees of war that guarded the elven kingdom. Otherwise, Lin Li wouldn't have agreed to the battle even if there was just one of them. He would instantly flee as far as he could. There were limits to training, and he would be a masochist if he were to go on and battle them. The trees of war in the nature domain could only be considered tree men, which belonged to an advanced nature magic that would turn normal trees into intelligent tree people. Moreover, in nature magic, there were also techniques that would turn beasts into orcs. The spectators began to find it peculiar after feeling amazed. Since Lin Li had already started to hover in the air, what could the trees of war do? They couldn't possibly fly too, could they? Most of them knew that it would be impossible for the actual trees of war to be the ones that appeared here, because they had heard that the trees of war were capable of capturing even dragons, let alone a levitating mage. Vidas stood on top of the tallest tree and looked up at Lin Li, who was in the sky. He sneered with contempt, and thought, although this human mage has reached the legendary realm at such a young age, which is rather admirable, this genius mage is destined to become only a piece of history because he has met me today. Although the world was peaceful now, and there hadn't been any large-scale conflict between the Elven Kingdom and human nations for almost 1,000 years, Didos felt that it was his responsibility to decrease the power of humans as much as possible as an elf. That human mage named Felix was indeed a rare genius, but he had only just reached the legendary realm, judging from his aura. Level 20 and 22 weren't just different in terms of numbers. This also meant the difference in grasping of rule power. Even a slightly better understanding of rule power would result in unimaginable change in power and strength. Didos waved his Helios scepter, and a series of gigantic tree men, which were extremely agile, shot towards Lin Li. These tree men's arms were wrapped in thick black vines. When they leaped into the air, they threw these black vines in Lin Li's direction. Lin Li's tiny body was immediately swallowed in this sea of black vines that seemed like giant cobras. Everyone gasped at this scene unfolding above the harvest square. This was the power of a legendary powerhouse and that of the magical domain. Didos was the king in this magical domain that he had created. He controlled everything in this domain. Even though his opponent was also a legendary powerhouse who did not possess a magical domain was not legendary enough. I'm so sorry, Captain Sienna. Although everyone won't get much, we still thank you for your generosity. The outcome of this bet was clear. Some people were already making their way out. Of course, they didn't forget to mock this newly appointed official of Duland. It just felt too good. Arother sighed deeply. William stared above the square mindlessly. Thick vines loomed over the entire sky above the square. That mage Felix was nowhere to be found. That powerful aura distinct to legendary mages was also gone in a split second. Did everything really end? Wilkinson and his companions looked up and felt a sense of despair. Where else in Amril could they find another pharmaceutics master as knowledgeable as Master Felix? Though they had only learned from Mage Felix for a few months, all of them had made great improvements. However, the more they improved, the more they felt that Mage Felix's pharmaceutic skill was so great it was immeasurable. Although Wilkinson had almost reached master level, he still didn't feel like he'd caught up to Mage Felix at all. Such a noble pharmaceutics master had fallen in a meaningless bet shamelessly initiated by a human and an elf in cahoots. This was not just a great loss for Wilkinson himself, but also the entire pharmaceutics industry, and even the entire Amril. Be it Castellan Arother of Roland City, William who'd invited them to the auction, or that wretched elf who was the descendant of the Helios, all of them had to pay for this. Wilkinson swore in his heart that he would definitely punish these scoundrels with his own power even if the Pharmacist Guild wouldn't avenge Mage Felix because of selfish interests. Just as everyone thought that everything was over, a spark of fire erupted from the sea of black vines hanging over the harvest square as if a tiny spark in a tub of oil. However, it grew into a mass of fire and engulfed all the vines in the sky. Those black vines disappeared in a matter of seconds, and dark ash fell to the ground like snow. Everyone turned to the sky and got a shock at what they saw. They couldn't help but exclaim that it was no wonder this young mage dared to bet with that elf. His life was guaranteed at the very least, just relying on this creature. Those obstructing vines were cleared from the sky. Where Mage Felix had been, a full-grown crimson dragon now stood, flapping its wings. Damn it! This trip was really worth it. They got to witness a fight between legendary powerhouse, the legendary nature magical domain. And now even a full-grown crimson dragon. This fully grown crimson dragon wasn't the one Lin Li had killed in the underground palace, but rather was created with that crimson dragon as foundation. It grew new flesh over the bones of a humorous WYRM. It seemed quite redundant to do this. After all, why not directly turn the corpse of the crimson dragon into an undead dragon, since he had obtained the complete corpse? Lin Li had gotten this humorous WYRM at the Scar of Death in the Blackstone Mountains. If the crimson dragon's corpse was in the same state as back then, it would indeed be better to turn it into a humorous WYRM. However, Lin Li had encountered High Priest Sendros after getting out of the Scar of Death, and Sendros had given him the extremely rare Heart of the Fallen. Heart of the Fallen was a treasure that could make any necromancer go crazy. Even the Darkness Shrine's high priest Sendros had only seen 6 in his lifetime. 3 of them belonged to the 3 undead lords of the Shadowglen, while the other 3 were stored in the Darkness Shrine. The one that Sendros had given Lin Li was one of the 3 stored in the Darkness Shrine. For undead creatures, integrating a piece of Heart of the Fallen was equivalent to swallowing thousands of soul fires. The only way for undead creatures to raise their levels was to swallow the soul fire of other undead creatures continuously. Hence, a Heart of the Fallen was even enough for a Death Knight to rise to a Retribution Knight. However, the preciousness of the Heart of the Fallen wasn't simply that it allowed undead creatures to improve their power. It wouldn't be so rare if it could do just that. The real reason why the Heart of the Fallen was so precious was because it could bring life to undead creatures. Although the humorous WYRM that Lin Li had gotten from the Scar of Death only possessed a level 20 dragon crystal, its soul fire was so pure that even Sendros praised it. According to Sendros, the purity of this humorous WYRM's dragon crystal matched that of the 3 undead lords' soul fire in the Shadowglen. Following Sendros' recommendation, Lin Li integrated the Heart of the Fallen with the soul fire of that humorous WYRM, giving the WYRM some level of intelligence. Hence, Kanoris had advised him to use the Crimson Dragon's corpse on this intelligent humorous WYRM when Lin Li had killed the dragon in the underground palace, instead of splitting it up to use for magical equipment. Of course, Lin Li hadn't gotten this precious Heart of the Fallen for nothing. Sendros had received a chance to concoct the Tribute of Darkness in return. It seemed like Sendros was on the losing side since he had used such a precious treasure in exchange for a mere chance. However, if the Tribute of Darkness was successfully concocted, it'd be far more useful to a necromancer compared to the Heart of the Fallen. The Tribute of Darkness. Lin Li felt rather guilty upon recalling his promise. That was a super potion that even pharmaceutics gurus couldn't guarantee to concoct successfully. If one could guarantee success, he would probably be stepping into the Divine Smith realm already. Unfortunately, although Lin Li knew the formula, he had only a 30% success rate given his current ability. After integrating the Heart of the Fallen into the humorous WYRM, it possessed intelligence and life. After Lin Li used the Crimson Dragon corpse yet again and gave the humorous WYRM a body, this humorous WYRM was no different from a real Crimson Dragon. Perhaps the only difference was that a real Crimson Dragon was so incredibly proud that it wouldn't let itself become a human's pet. A Crimson Dragon, which had integrated the Heart of the Fallen, radiated such pure dragon aura that even Vidas, who was the closest to Lin Li, couldn't tell that it was an undead creature, let alone those spectators in the audience. Of course, this Crimson Dragon shouldn't be considered an undead creature, but rather a true Crimson Dragon. With a dragon's roar, every animal in Roland City collapsed onto the ground, and every villager started to tremble for no apparent reason. Sienna tapped his thigh. Pointing towards the sky, he excitedly yelled to the surrounding people, "Look! Look! I have said this before. How could that elven mage match Mage Felix? Haha! Look at it! It's a Crimson Dragon that Mage Felix summoned." Seeing how proud Sienna was, some people gnashed their teeth with resentment, some looked towards the sky in contemplation, and some weren't convinced at all and refuted Sienna. That elven legendary mage possessed his own magical domain, while Felix was a mage who had only just stepped into the legendary realm. Even if Felix had a Crimson Dragon, it would only take the elven mage more effort to defeat him. Humph. Sienna scorned that opinion, and contemptuously said, "No more nonsense. Let's continue the bet and see who gets the last laugh." Sienna didn't care what level the elven mage was. He firmly believed that Mage Felix could easily handle this elf, given that he was able to defeat a terrifying lich. William tapped his chest. Today was such an eventful day. His heart was still beating with perseverance even though it suffered a lot today. Looking at that Crimson Dragon in the sky, he could tell as an appraiser that its power was only of level 21. After reaching the legendary realm and above, the difference between every level in terms of power wasn't something that could be made up for with numerical advantage. That was because the competition was no longer about the strength of magical power or mental strength, but rather the understanding of rule power. This was like a group of primary school kids comparing with a university student in terms of general knowledge. 1,000 primary school kids wouldn't be a match for a university student. DDoS was a level 22 legendary mage who possessed a powerful nature magical domain. Even if Lin Li was a level 20 legendary powerhouse, and had the help of a level 21 Crimson Dragon, the difference in abilities still couldn't be made up for. This was also why the Dark Blade that possessed 3 legendary powerhouses couldn't do anything to the Manhwa family, who had only 1 legendary powerhouse. The difference in power between legendary powerhouses couldn't be made up for using numbers, even if it was just a difference of 1 level or even a tiny difference in understanding of rule power. William was very clear on this. Hence, he wasn't too optimistic about the situation even after the appearance of the Crimson Dragon. Its appearance could at most increase the Mage Felic's chance of survival, but it was still impossible for Mage Felic to win this battle. Since even William could see this, DDoS, who was on the other side of the bet, was even more aware of it. DDoS was indeed quite shocked at the appearance of the Crimson Dragon. He had thought Lin Li would use potion to increase his abilities, and hadn't expected him to summon a Crimson Dragon out of nowhere. However, to be very honest, the effect of summoning a Crimson Dragon was even worse than increasing his own abilities. Just a Crimson Dragon? Do you really think you can burn my entire nature domain? A level 21 Crimson Dragon was nothing to DDoS. One should not think that fire was definitely the domain's natural enemy upon seeing the lush forest. The so-called restraint of elements was never absolute. More importantly, it depended on what kind of abilities their users possessed. Especially so for nature magic, which was actually the amalgamation of various elemental rules, and fire element was one of the mandatory items among those. The essence of nature magic could be said to be a display of world rules. It was every mage's life goal to create a domain that was similar to the world. Even though the nature magical domain was just based on the combination of derived rules, the magnitude of its rule power shouldn't be underestimated. Of course, nothing in this world was perfect, there were always 2 sides to everything. Although the integration of rules of many elements could form a powerful small world rule, it was much harder for the creator of this nature magical domain to analyze the essence of every elemental rule deeply compared to realizing the fundamental elemental rules directly. Hence, it was 100 times harder for the creator of a nature magical domain to understand the essence of world rules via the small world rule compared to an ordinary legendary mage. In order for a legendary mage who created a nature magical domain to understand the essence of world rules via the small world rule, he had to analyze the derived rule of every single element, and use this analysis to trace back to its origin, the fundamental elemental rules. However, immense effort was required in order to gain a thorough understanding of just one rule, not mentioning the various derived rules from the small world rule. There was yet another way. That was to constantly strengthen one's own nature magical domain. Once the nature magical domain was powerful enough, the small world rule would naturally become the true world rule. And its owner wouldn't even have to analyze the essence of elemental rules at all. These 2 ways required talent and hard work, respectively. However, both also needed a similar condition: good luck. DDoS chose the second way as his bloodline of the Helios family enabled him to gain more from his hard work. The effect of the bloodline was still very limited. Even though he could gain many times more than others from his hard work, he still plateaued at level 22. In order to improve his nature magical domain as a whole, he needed a treasure which contained powerful and pure nature energy. DDoS had put all his hopes on the branch now. This wasn't just a wild guess, rather, he had a strong sense that this branch would be the key to his improvement. Not to mention that Lin Li was weaker than him, DDoS would have given his all to seize this rare opportunity even if his opponent had been stronger than him. The appearance of the Crimson Dragon didn't affect DDoS. Fire magic couldn't pose any threat to the nature magical domain created by a level 22 legendary mage. A series of gigantic tree men leaped into the air as if there were springs in their feet. If one were to look at it from afar, he would think that there was a locust's plague in the harvest square. However, the spectators sitting in the square watched everything with shock and fear. They feared that the shield of the square would be broken, but they also didn't want to miss this exciting battle. In the air, a scorching dragon's breath swept past the attacking tree men, and engulfed them with flames. However, the tree men didn't just turn into ash this time. They continued to attack with their burning bodies like torches, appearing to be even more frightening. The crimson dragon roared in wrath, and swept out with its muscular tail. The torch-like tree men all fell into pieces with a thud. Explosive sounds came from the sky like fireworks, and splashes of fire immediately followed. The humorous WYRM that had integrated the heart of the fallen had completely recovered the combat instincts of a WYRM, and didn't require Lin Li instructions at all. Lin Li stood on the crimson dragon's back steadily. The dark clouds above his head loomed even lower. Due to the shielding field of the harvest square, the view in front of the spectators' eyes was rather bizarre. Lush forest covered the ground, while dark clouds only covered the portion of the sky outside the shield one. Everything withered in the cold winter. Crystal clear snow fell from the sky, and the lush green was instantly covered by white snow. Everything seemed really beautiful, but this was the collision between magical domains. It was a competition between the understanding of rule power of mages, and a real battle between legendary powerhouses. However, seeing that Lin Li had displayed his magical domain, other than those people purely watching for fun, everyone with some understanding of magical domains was rather confused. The frost magical domain wasn't unfamiliar to many, as it was the first domain that the majority of legendary mages would create. In other words, the frost magical domain was an extremely ordinary, fundamental, and primitive magical domain. This was because what mages, especially human mages, learned the most before reaching the legendary realm were ice magic spells. Hence, it was easier for mages to understand the rules of the ice element. Many people present knew about this, but this didn't mean that they looked down on legendary mages who used frost domains. After all, many of them hadn't even reached legendary realm themselves. The real reason why they were confused by Lin Li's action was because the opponent he faced was a legendary mage who'd created a nature magical domain. Although nature magical domain wasn't exclusive to the elves, almost nobody could match the talent of the elves in terms of learning nature magic. Nature magical domain was also called a small world domain as it included the derived rules of all fundamental elemental rules: earth, fire, water, wind, light, and darkness. This formed a magical domain that possessed the fetus of a world. Comparing frost magical domain to the nature magical domain, the difference in strength was evident. Hence, the spectators all felt that Lin Li should have sacrificed the Crimson Dragon to attack Vidas by surprise in order to get a chance to escape. After all, a 20-year-old legendary mage still had a long way to go. Though nobody wanted to acknowledge it, there was a high chance that Lin Li might reach the sanctuary realm eventually. With such a bright future ahead, why should Lin Li ruin his future just for some reputation? Vidas originally had the same thought as the spectators. The frost rule, which was also a derived rule from the fundamental elemental rules, had no advantage compared to natural magical domain. However, Vidas' heart trembled when these two magical domains really collided. This frost domain definitely was somehow wrong. Vidas didn't know what the problem was, but the obvious truth was that there was some lagging when he used the rule power as the controller of his nature magical domain. It felt as if he had gone back to the time when he'd first created the nature magical domain. However, it hadn't happened for a very long time. It was utterly unbelievable that a simple frost domain could develop resistance to his nature magical domain. Vidas didn't dare to underestimate this young human mage anymore. No matter what hid behind this frost domain, the undeniable truth was that Vidas felt it more and more difficult to use the domain's power, and was unable to bring out his true potential. Obviously, Lin Li hadn't just used a simple frost domain. The appearance of this frost domain was just to make way for the light and darkness domain like before. The two pieces of the debris of the stars Lin Li had gotten, holy light and gloomy dark, had helped him to create this light and darkness domain with the rule power they contained. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.